So I've got the pleasure of introducing the panel, and it's a collection of old friends and new friends, so it's really exciting. So I'll go from my left, your right, all the way down. So first, I'd like to welcome Hsieh. He's a co-founder and managing partner of GFT Ventures, and he's had some great experiences in the US and other places. He co-founded TransLink Capital, which is a Palo Alto-based early-stage venture fund. He was also managing director of Samsung Ventures and started that effort in Silicon Valley. And as you know, Samsung has a huge presence globally in the US in particular, and especially in Silicon Valley, and has been very active over there. He's got the requisite degree from Stanford University and also Seoul National University in Korea. So thank you, Hsieh. And then next to him is Fred Farina, who I've known for a long time. Fred's an amazing person at an amazing institution. He's in charge of all tech transfer and commercialization at Caltech. And I think people don't realize how tremendous Caltech is. It's relatively small. If you look at the number of students at Caltech, I think it's 5 times less than MIT and 7 times less than Stanford. So think about it. It's relatively small, but look at what they've accomplished. So we'd love to hear Fred later talk about quality versus quantity and how you make that trade-off when it comes to technology and startups. Because with the brand of Caltech and the money and the number of applicants they get, they can have a lot more than the 2,000 or so students that they have. So there's a real interesting story. Fred's very accomplished. He's got engineering degrees from INSA Lyon and also Caltech, and is a registered patent agent. So you can ask him all your detailed patent questions. So thanks, Fred, for coming. Next to Fred is Hsieh. And Wen is also a Caltech person. He's got all of his degrees, including his PhD from Caltech. And he's the founder of Matter Venture Partners. He was also one of 3 senior managing directors at Kleiner Perkins for several years, which, as you know, is a storied venture capital firm in Silicon Valley. And he worked on such great companies as DJI Drones, Amprius, and Bloom Energy. And earlier in his career was at McKinsey & Company. And next to him is Aditya Mathur. And Aditya is the founder and managing director of Elevate VC, based here in Singapore. He's a deep tech veteran and has a lot of great international experience from Silicon Valley, Tokyo, Mumbai, Shanghai, etc. And 2 of the companies that he worked at and that he helped grow became multi-billion-dollar exits to Cisco and Infineon. And of course, he also has the requisite engineering degree from Stanford. So last but certainly not least is a semiconductor industry and Silicon Valley legend, Professor Alberto Sangiovanni-Vincentelli. So thank you so much for coming. And I thought that the rest of us may just sit in the audience and let you speak for an hour and a half, because that would be wonderful. You need no introduction, but I will mention 2 amazing things. As an academic at Berkeley, you've got more than 1,000 publications in peer-reviewed journals, and that's astounding. As you know, a lot of senior professors have 100 or 200 or whatnot. And by the way, he co-founded 2 companies that are now worth about $100 billion each. But more important than the money is the role those 2 companies, Cadence and Synopsys, played in the history of the semiconductor and microelectronics industry, and thus the whole economy at large. So it's really a great story, and we're very, very thankful that you're here. So thank you for your time. So that's the panel. So let's start off with this. Each panelist is going to spend anywhere from 2 minutes or 5 minutes, whatever is appropriate, giving you their thoughts on either what they're doing, what they've done in the past, and what's hot when it comes to the topic of physical sciences. So Hsieh, we'll just put the pressure on you, and you can go first.
Okay, that's big shoes to fill, but it's such a great pleasure to be here. Thank you for the organizers for inviting me and putting me with this esteemed panel. I actually prefer to be in the audience to listen, but since I do have to earn my keep, I'll introduce myself. My name is Hsieh. I'm a co-founder with GFT Ventures, Global Frontier Technology Ventures. So we are a frontier tech fund, but we actually focus on investing in AI and data science companies. So my co-founding partner was at NVIDIA for 20 years, leading their M&A and investments. So naturally, we have a bias there. But one thing you missed in my introduction, before I came to the US, I was actually a biochemist doing research at Seoul National University. And so back in the day, and this was back in 92 to 94, being in a lab was a very laborious process. And I'm sure things have gotten much better in the last 30 years, but I remember the days where a lot of manual labor, a lot of physical reading of papers. And what excites me most about the opportunities ahead of us in terms of materials and science and whatnot is, quite frankly, the role that data and AI can play to accelerate the research and the products of that. In fact, I'm sure many of you have been reading whenever Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, talks about the longer term impact of AI, he always talks about the improvements to human society driven by breakthroughs in science that are now enabled by AI and data science. And so what I see is the most exciting opportunities now that we are living in the world of AI, where compute is available, there's data availability, and the opportunity to process that to come out with amazing discoveries is quite mind-boggling. In fact, I spent 2 years in the lab putting together a protein molecule structure, and it wasn't even the entire molecule, it was the active cleft of that molecule, and that took 2+ years of research. As we all know, with the advent of AlphaFold, basically every single protein is now profiled and the full structure, three-dimensional, is recognized. So think about the progress we've made just up to this point. And if we think about the progress extrapolating going forward, we are living in an exciting time. Any physical material or substance can potentially be optimized with the physical properties that we're looking for. And we actually have the data and the processing power to be able to understand that, to build the structure and actually synthesize those molecules. And from drug discovery to industrial materials and whatnot, this is a huge, huge opportunity. So personally, I'm super excited about it.
Hello, pleasure to be here. So I'm at Caltech. We are a small school, as Patrick said, of science and engineering, and very oriented to, I would say, fundamental science. And of course, we have some applied areas, but which makes it challenging sometimes to find technologies that are further down the path of commercialization enough that you can actually interest venture capitalists or industry generally. And so particularly in the life sciences. And I say that because I oversee all of the commercialization activities, including in the life sciences. I find physical sciences more challenging in the sense that in the life sciences, you have a clear path to commercial. It's therapeutics, for example, you go to animal trials and then human trials, and there's a path. In the physical sciences, actually, our colleagues at MIT call them tough tech, because what we have at universities typically is hammers looking for nails. So we have ideas. You really don't know where they fit in the market and what kind of business you can create out of those. And that's always much more challenging to find the killer applications. Oftentimes, the startups have to pivot after 2 or 3 tries of different markets. But we have a lot of that, so we have to contend with that. And so to help this process from lab to market, we have put in place over the last 10 years a plan to create an ecosystem around the campus that facilitates that process and holds the hands of the researchers, faculty, students, postdocs, from the lab to market. So we have some early stage de-risking, prototyping funding that goes into the lab. We have created an entrepreneur in residence program that where we have people that actually done startups outside university that have had acquisitions and IPOs that come in for 2 or 3 years and help the faculty create this plan to market and all the milestones that need to be achieved, connections to VCs, pitching, etc. And as of 5 years ago, we launched a venture fund internal to Caltech that is able to seed these companies at a $1 to $2 million level to get them off the campus in the continuum, again, from the lab to market, and including incubator space that's adjacent to market that didn't exist before. When you were in school, there was no such thing. It's like 4 years ago, so you've been out for a long time. So not that long. No, you look young, but you've been around. And so all these things are helpful to get these early stage technologies to market, and it's new. And I think that universities of research need to put in place these programs to get technologies out. I'll stop here. I'll give it to Gwen.
Well, hello everyone. My name is Wen. I won't give an intro on my fund because apparently I have to give a reverse pitch at 4:30. So I'll save my vocals for then. What makes me very excited is also what makes me a bit worried about some of the things we're seeing in sort of this physical AI space. And I'll give you one example. So I'm terribly enthusiastic about the roles that robots can play, robotics, particularly robotics as a service, where they're now paid a wage equivalent for some of the things that they can do that are comparable to what humans can do, right? And this is particularly important because number one, there's a blue collar labor shortage that's really not going away. It's more pronounced in the developed countries, but it's equally pronounced in some of the developing countries because, young people don't want to have to do welding or loading a truck or cleaning a bathroom. These things are things that, frankly, humans shouldn't be doing. We should outsource it to a machine or a robot. So I'm really enthused that there are many efforts to pursue those type of things. What really worries me, though, on the sort of the flip side, is the extreme hype around expectations, right? You see a lot of these videos online about these robots doing, a simple task, and somehow the video suggests that you can extrapolate that task to, everything else that you can do at home. And unfortunately for us that are close to the robot action, we're not close to anywhere for that reality, right? I think robots can do a limited set of tasks reasonably well, but we're far, far away from general capabilities the way that humans are. But unfortunately, the fundraising and environment and the hype around all of that is leading things the wrong direction. And why it's worrisome is because, number one, there are consequences for overhype, right? If you overhype it too much and the balloon deflates, there's a chilling effect for the sector, at least from an investment and entrepreneurial point of view, that may come about for a long time. But robotics needs to be a marathon, right? It's not a sprint, rest, go cold for 5 years and get going. I'm super enthused, but I think a lot of the promises that are being made, or at least being telescoped, are things that are probably 10 years out. And we need every one of those 10 years to get there, by the way, not sort of hype 1 or 2 years, decacorn companies that have never shipped any product or revenue, misleading the public or other investors. So this is nothing unique to this cycle, of course. We saw it in the internet. I'm sure we saw it during the mobile age and compute age, but as with everything nowadays, it's amped up to level 20 instead of level 10. So while I'm super enthused, I'm also super worried.
Hey, I'm Aditya Mathur with Elevate VC. My background was also in chemical engineering, funnily enough, out of undergrad. And I went on to become a semiconductor engineer. So this topic is very, very dear to me. The reason we set up Elevate, and I think that leads into what I'm really excited about, and in materials particularly, is we set up Elevate to really help companies and great scientists come out and incubate their companies and grow out into the world. That's really our raison d'etre. We chose Singapore because we think that there's a lot of really great innovation coming out of here, and that's where people are thinking in a slightly different way from, say, Silicon Valley or other parts of the world. And to us, that is very exciting. What we are focusing on over here is areas that we think Singapore has an unfair advantage to win in. So, for example, what is it about climate or agriculture or different spaces, especially around the equatorial belt, that you won't get in more temperate zones, that you start thinking about in Singapore? What do you start thinking about? We talked about when we were talking about robotics and aging populations and a lack of manpower. Singapore is at the forefront of that. We have an aging population. What's going to help us get to the next level? And we, with Singapore right now, we aren't looking at systems, but we're looking at the materials that go into systems. So what are what's the best way to convert electricity and store it? What's the best way to manage the huge growing amount of compute that's going to be required? Where Singapore, again, is investing a lot into, whether it's optics and, or CPO with semiconductors. We think that there's a lot of great innovation happening here. We think that with the amount of data and the amount of quality algorithms that you have, and with Singapore's real push towards high throughput experimentation, we're going to see some really cool materials coming out of here, and that's what we are very, very excited and focused on.
Thank you. Thank you very much for being here. So I see many young faces, and I would like to tie into what Wei said, because I couldn't agree more, right? There is a lot of hype around, but this is the history of Silicon Valley. There's always been this huge hype and then boom, right? And something sticks, right? And so you friends from venture capital community, you hope that the company you invested in is going to stick, because otherwise you are in years problems, right? And the issue is, do we want to kind of not ride the wave and try to go to the foundational stuff? And so don't think that because everybody does AI, you should be doing AI as well. And the question you have to ask is that, what can I contribute of substance? So what can I show is different than what other people have done? Me too is not going to work, right? So you have to think about what you bring to the party. And so this is a message to the young people here that want to be entrepreneurs. So, and don't start with the idea, I want to be an entrepreneur. That's a bad idea, to be thinking, I want to be an entrepreneur. You have to do, is what we call studiositas in Latin. So it means you want to study, you want to be deep at something, whatever that is. And then if what you do has an impact, or at least you think it has an impact, which is better than nothing. But then you say, what can I do to bring this idea to the market or to the people, right? And so that's the key important thing. So you have to be solid, not shaky. I mean, many of the young companies that I've seen are shaky. You start asking questions to the founders, they don't know how to answer that. And I say, well, it works. I say, did you think about why it works? What is the technology you're using? How long do you need to take to bring this idea to market? Oh boy, you should see. And so in some sense, I think that also, unfortunately, the role of the incubators and so on has been overhyped. Because the point is that if you have an incubator, then everybody wants to go to the incubator, and the incubator doesn't know what is a good idea and what is a bad idea. So you end up incubating everything, including crap, right? And incubating is not a good idea. And so the issue about and I have that beef also with my Berkeley incubation ideas, is that you have to be strict. You don't want to incubate whatever. You want to incubate the quality. And I come to your comment about quality, not quantity. It's the quality that matters. Unfortunately, in the university evaluation system, first thing they ask you is, how many startups do you have? 500. Yeah! I say, well, okay, how many of these have had success? 0.5. That's not good, right? How many companies your university has? 5. How many successful? 5. That's a university. That's the role of a good incubator, that everybody has a chance of being successful. So don't make me mistake. I heard here, so we are going to have 25 new initiatives, and we are going to fund 100 startups. Maybe too many, right? Do you ask the waste of resources that is going in there? So you have to have quality, quality and quality. in investment as well as the research as well as in the formation of companies. Now, about what is interesting. Another thing that you should think about is that the frontier, in my opinion, is across different scientific domains. So it's interdisciplinarity. And for example, I don't want to put myself, but for example, the latest things that I'm doing are in biology, and I'm what the heck does he do in biology, right? Well, there is intersection between things, and we are doing, I'm the chairman of the board of a quantum computing company that is crossing with semiconductors. Why? Because we believe that the future of quantum computing is about silicon. And our company does quantum dots, so silicon spins, right? So electron spins. And why do we believe that? Where is the interdisciplinarity coming from? Well, if you use standard CMOS, you have all the manufacturing in the world ready for you. And you can scale because silicon scales, right? So you can go to the 100 million qubits, right? When you see people that are playing with 10, 20, 100 qubits, ain't going to solve the problem of computing for the future. So you got to have a scaling technology. That's just to give you an idea of the kind of foundational thinking that you have to have, right? So don't think that, because people do say ion trapping, that's the technology. There are many technologies. Think about it and what is more promising and so on. So that's my 2 cents worth for Singapore and US and you guys, young guys.
Don't incubate crap.
That's my bottom line. That's it.
Yeah, summarize it.
Flush it down the toilet.
Well said.
Yeah, that's such a great discussion. And the scarce resource is usually experienced entrepreneurs and experienced management teams. Now, that's hard to say, as scientists, right? I used to love the science I did, and I used to think science was the most important part. And then you get a little more experience, and you realize it's actually the product and the engineering and the customers. And then you get a little bit more experience beyond that, and you realize it's really about the people. Where do you go to get great entrepreneurs, great managers, great founders, great CEOs? They come in all shapes and sizes, so it's kind of hard to figure out who's going to be great. And there aren't enough of them. So really, we just need to develop more management talent and more founding talent because the supply of science seems somewhat unlimited. Now, most of it is not going to be relevant to a commercial application, but there's plenty of science. We just need more entrepreneurs. And to that point, we need entrepreneurs that know how to take science to the market, not just a generic MBA who thinks managing potato chips is the same as managing computer chips, as a famous person once said long ago. It turns out they're very different. So that was a great opening discussion. I'm going to ask a question to get things going, but then would really love an audience question. Originally, we were going to wait till the end to have audience participation. But let me ask my question. We'll have some discussion. And please, someone get the nerve to walk up to the microphone or just shout it out. It's a relatively small room and ask the question.
If not, we'll call on people. Yeah.
That's right.
We're in the university, right?
It's going to be like Harvard Business School. We will call on you. So don't be shy. So thinking about hype cycles, why is there hype? Well, sometimes there's hype just because you're not thinking carefully about something and the trend is your friend and humans are social creatures. They all run over to the side of the room together because it gives them comfort. But some of it, I think, is scientists and professors don't appreciate or understand the challenges of going from a lab demo to something at scale, let alone something that actually makes sense from a business perspective. And let me just give one example, and then I might ask one of you or someone jump in. If not, I know someone I would ask. So 1987, I was in my PhD program at Yale. Why was I at Yale? I couldn't get into Caltech. True story. Couldn't get into Caltech. I didn't know Fred back then. But I was at the American Physical Society annual meeting where the high temperature superconductors were being announced from Bell Labs. And everyone was certain within 5 years, every product in the world was going to have a high temperature superconductor. And here we are almost 40 years later, and I don't see too many high temperature superconductors around. And why did that happen? Why were so many smart people wrong? And we could talk about the nanotech boom in the late 90s. But does someone want to give some color on that? And I'm not blaming us as a community, but it doesn't help us when we say we're 5 years away, when it turns out, turns out we're 40 and counting. So Wen, what do you think? I'm just kind of looking at you.
Oh man.
What is it? Why? And what's the solution? Or is there no solution? That's just part of the business.
So I'm not an expert on superconductors. I know a little about semiconductors, but I think it could be for a number of reasons, right? From a technology point of view, some technologies are a lot more difficult near the limit. And so to complete that remaining 5 or 10% might take you 1,000%. And I suspect, and by the way, curing cancer is one of those things, right? AGI, I argue, might be one of those things. Question mark. Okay. So, by the way, when these guys say high temperature superconductors, it's like 1 Kelvin. Okay. It's not like 37 degrees C, right? To put it in perspective.
77 if you use liquid nitrogen.
Okay, 77. All right, so a little higher. By the way, 273, right, is 0 degrees C, just to calibrate for everyone. So I think there is a technical hurdle sometimes that is nonlinear. And I think that's one of those things that you're fighting material science, physics, and it's not that easy to get to that limit. It's like, going close to the speed of light in speed. There's some limits there. I think that's one reason. I don't know enough about the physics to claim that, but I suspect it's one of those. I think the second reason might be sort of the market need for it, right? Yes, superconductors can solve many things, but we found other things that are simpler, easier, more amenable, scalable, using what we have to get around the need for a superconductor, right? Copper conductivity at room temperature is not too bad. Semiconductors have done pretty well. AC transportation as a DC has been pretty nice. Now with DC data centers, maybe we need to bring superconductors back, but for the longest time, I think what's been around us, humans are super practical, right? I mean, the example I use is when you try to do a workout, if your main muscle gives, the rest of the body sort of compensates for that loss. Humans are really good at that. And I think this is another example where other things have made up for the fact that superconductors didn't come to fruition, and we're okay with that. That's sort of two thoughts. Yeah, please.
Go. Yeah.
Maybe he's the superconductor.
No, I don't know about that. But I think there's, I think most of us have been around for more than a couple decades and seen technology cycles come and go. One of the technologies that was really hyped in the early days and arguably completely overfunded was autonomous driving. So that was almost 20 years ago when the first Waymo vans with their massive LiDARs started to roam around in the Bay Area. And yet, if you come to San Francisco now, it's been well over a year where the commercial service of Waymo is readily available. Now it's more expensive, so the majority of folks that are using it are tourists, but it's kind of like almost a must experience, almost like an amusement ride now. It's like the new cable. It's actually a better version of the cable car. That's right. And if you think about how long it took after the initial hype cycle, it took almost 20 years for the commercialization to happen. And it took well over hundreds of billions of dollars, because if you think about who are the 3 kind of remaining autonomous driving companies out there? Waymo, clearly, with the big mothership of Alphabet, right? There's a company called Zoox, which was acquired by Amazon. And then there's Tesla. And all of the several dozens of autonomous driving startups are completely dead. Now, so it took longer, so that was the hype. But if you think about how Waymo and other autonomous driving companies are completely changing the dynamic of the transportation industry, it is going to be dramatic, because taking the human labor out of a commercial vehicle, and that could be passenger cars, robotaxis, and especially delivery trucks and transportation carriers, that is a massive opportunity where the optimization of that, because the science and technology has been proven to scale, to be reliable, has massive implications. So I think we will see a lot of technology over time that was completely overhyped, so disappointed, and yet the few survivors are going to completely change things. And I see that happening in a lot of technology areas. I think another example is, Wen mentioned about humanoid robotics. I think humanoid robotics is going to go the same cycle. It's going to take at least a decade, if not longer. Maybe there's some learnings from the autonomous driving lessons learned, right? And the winners are ultimately going to be the ones that are far well funded. And that's why you have this massive arms race of humanoid robotics companies raising hundreds of millions of dollars in a round that will probably continue to raise for the next decade before you see any sort of scalable revenue. And there's many, many other examples. AR, VR, completely overhyped when it first came out 15 years ago. Now it's sought for dead. But trust me, it's going to come back. And literally, with the advancements in AI, everybody that's wearing glasses or has earphones and whatnot, the augmented reality with VR glasses and whatnot, even though Apple even couldn't make it commercially successful, it's going to happen. It just takes longer, and it takes more money than expected.
Can I add something? Yeah, quickly. I think what happens is that there's a scientific breakthrough, major breakthrough, and then people get excited about the promise of where it might go, and they massively underestimate what it takes to create a business out of these new breakthroughs. And it happened, from the .com to the nanotech to the clean tech, and these things cycles, right? And then you have investors, none of them here in this room, that have major FOMO, which is fear of missing out, right? Yeah. So they see that, and they jump.
I just try to suppress it.
So, even 5 years after a bunch of investments in quantum computing that have gone nowhere, some firms want absolutely. You have to have a quantum investment, otherwise, you're not good enough, whatever, you're not cool. And so all these things, but at the end, I think the ones that survive are the quality ones. The ones that are based on, substantive technologies, have differentiated from other technologies and can sustain those cycles are the ones so that's why quality is to be favored over quantity. But at the same time, you need to be able to ride the waves that happen when you do have these hypes in the markets.
Well, I heard that you were mentioning the scientists. I think that in this thing, they are the least, to be blamed. I was referring to the initial comment about, the scientists get all excited and they're the cause of a hype. In my opinion, no. Is actually
investors. Actually, I'm
coming there. I'm coming there, and that's what I wanted to say. And why is that? Because if you go around today and you ask the investors, what are you investing on? Try one investor who doesn't say investing in AI. Everybody's investing in AI. So if you do the best thing since a bottle of beer in semiconductors, right? And you go to an investor, say, well, I would like, say, are you using AI? And say, no. And say, oh, we invest in AI-based companies. Sorry. Try to find somebody else. And that's the FOMO stuff, right? But it's not only FOMO stuff. Is the way in which you invest and what is the goal of investing, right? So I remember in the times of the internet, the big bubble of the 2000, right? There was a company, very famous investor, Axel, right? Is the number one investment company today, right? It was number one, not one, but among in the year 2000. And there was one guy who invested in Synopsys, right? So I say, well, what is that you are so interested on now? And he says, internet. And I say, well, there are 200 million companies that are coming up. Why do you want to do that? And say, because I know that if I get out soon enough, I make money. I say, what is that? We are not at the casino. And no, we are, right? To a certain extent, the investment business, especially in the hype cycle, is a casino. So let's put all our money on 13, right? And why? Because it's a lucky number, right? And so we can get a lot of money. So the hype is one cause is that, right? So it's an easy path to money, right? So return of investment. The second point is, I think the company themselves. So you were talking about quantum hype, right? Now, here to the CEO of the companies in quantum, right? Is BS all the way. They don't have anything yet.
There's one guy in quantum on the panel.
Yes.
He's not here, but it's okay.
Me. But what I'm saying, one thing that you can go around and look at the company I'm involved in, they don't say anything, because otherwise I kill them. Right? So, being Italian, you have to be worried. But when I say that I'm going to kill
Oh, man. Oh, wow. Okay. Yes, we'll make you an offer you cannot refuse.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, it's hard to segue away from that. I don't want to. No, those are all great points. So let's do this. Is someone brave enough to come ask a question or just shout it out? There we go.
Go, Mike.
Yeah.
Lead by example.
You can use the mic.
Hi, my name is Anuj Jain, and don't kill me, but I run an incubator here. It's called National Grip. Essentially, we also debate about the quantity and quality issues. And you're absolutely right. When I went to Berkeley, they really proudly claimed that they had the higher number of startups than Stanford.
Unfortunately.
So quantity again.
That's true, unfortunately.
That's true. But my question is there to Prof and to Fred, that we come out with very good research output. We all know that. But the translation from the university to market path has a lot of obstacles, right? But you also mentioned in the morning announcement that Singapore is almost 25 years behind than Silicon Valley. So if you had to reverse engineer the ecosystem evolution and where Silicon Valley was, where we are today, what would you recommend for the whole ecosystem and all the well-intended and highly resourced people to do or to chart their path from here so that we don't go astray? And some critical factors for Caltech and Berkeley, what's been the critical success factor?
Caltech first.
All right. So we've been trying to recreate an ecosystem around us, not the same as Silicon Valley, not the same as others, because we've been losing our startups to up north, the Bay Area, down south, San Diego, and Boston. And the reason is because for a long time we didn't have the people that you mentioned, the management type team, the first CEO of a company that understands how to team up with the scientists to bring technology to market. We're also missing the capital and also facilities, which, in the deep tech area, you need specialized facilities. Quantum, you need dilution refrigerators that go down to temperature. I mean, you need just office space is not enough. So most innovation ecosystems have at the center of it a STEM research institution, and then you have to have the people that I just mentioned, the facilities, the early stage capital, and another one that's probably underestimated is the presence of larger companies like the initial Intel and HPs in the ecosystem that can buffer the life cycle of a startup, and workforce can go back and forth depending on the cycles, and that's very important to anchor the ecosystem. So I think number one to me is the people, like bringing talent that knows how to take technologies from a lab to the market. And these are very unique people. They have to speak the language of the researchers, the language of the VCs, understand how to really go in the dark with the technology that you don't know what market it is going after for the most part. You don't know how to create it. So you have to that piece. So attracting these people to your ecosystem, I think, is key. I think the funding you have here, so funding vehicles, either very early stage, typically, that can filter out the noise and fund the good ones, and then the infrastructure to incubate those in facilities where you can actually maybe you need labs, maybe you need whatever you need. I think these are the elements. Again, large companies to your ecosystem, and then time. It's going to take 50 years. And we have the same problem in Pasadena. We're starting to see startups staying there. We're now AWS in big time on campus for quantum computing. We let them have a building on campus. Meta now has a lab on campus. Eli Lilly just acquired one of our companies and is staying in Pasadena. So these are slow things that, different ways to attract these big companies are very important as well.
Well, I think that if you look at the Silicon Valley, it took 50 years, right, to develop. But the key point is that there is not a single thing that you have to do. An ecosystem is, by definition, has multiple players. And so I agree that one of the key components is large companies. But not any large company. You got to have intelligent large companies, right? And again, I may be very, elitist, but you have to have companies that really can provide you with problems. Scientists love to work out of problems, right? And they are willing to listen, and they're willing to take some degree of risk. Not too much, because otherwise it doesn't make sense. I mean, you kill the company itself. So intelligent companies, intelligent large companies, also because the intelligent large companies are a potential exit strategy. Because if you want to get a company, you want to have an exit, right? Either you go public or somebody is going to buy you, because otherwise it fails the purpose, right? And so that's one component. The second component is great research institution. So in Silicon Valley, Stanford and Berkeley, right? I mean, if you look at the founders, where do they come from? Stanford and Berkeley. Third, immigration policies. Because, I mean, I'm sorry to say, but Cadence was formed by, and Synopsys, by an Australian and Italian, right? Not by the local Americans, right? And if you look at the CEOs of the top companies, right, where do they come from? India, right? I mean, so one of the things that is, in my opinion, limiting Singapore is the way in which you treat the people that you bring here in terms of students, PhD and the like. So give them a potential to stay, right? And then it is incentivizing them to do. And I, kind of disagree about the management side, right? So many of the companies that I know, including Cadence and Synopsys, there was no management to be talked about. And the managers that we hired were actually horrible, right? And, seriously. And the point is that there is a great value of growing people from inside, right? And don't make the mistake of getting CEOs on a tech company which are MBAs. Never do that. Don't just know. Get the people who know the stuff, right? It's very, very important. For a certain while, we had the wave of the MBA CEOs. And what did they do? Not much, right? So the key point is that, yes, you can get some value out of these guys, but they cannot be the guys who give the life of the company, because they are not the life of the company, right? So you got to have that rare individual which is willing to make the evolution from a scientist to become a manager, if you like. But you learn by doing, in my opinion. And there is nothing better than learning by doing. It's like experimental research, right? Same thing.
I'll add a few things. I think if you want to do a Singaporean startup that is only focused on Singapore, I don't think you'll be successful, right?
Not enough.
What you want the startup to do is to be aware of what the world offers, right? Both either from a technology, labor, or market point of view. Meaning go out there and see the world, understand the global competitiveness, not just the Singapore competitiveness, and then ultimately figure out how to parse out what to keep and value in Singapore versus where to leverage things outside of Singapore, right?
Yeah.
And that needs to be embedded into the curriculum. You heard Hsieh today talk about setting up an outpost in Silicon Valley. That is an absolutely right thing to do. Right? Remember, it's and, not or, right? So, companies that we have here set up in Singapore, we should take them out to Silicon Valley, spend some time there, see what real world competition is like, and take a step back and say, hey, yes, I'm Singapore based. What can I get out of Singapore? And it might be local support. It might be the fact that the technology is local and somehow you can develop things faster here. But they also have to say, what can I get from the rest of the world? And it can be capital, it can be partnerships, it can be IP. And I think only that combination will really make it happen. Singapore is an amazing magnet for rest of the world, as you can attest. I can never see any of these people in Silicon Valley. I see them in Singapore, right? So clearly you're doing something right. But I think the looking out and taking the best from abroad and bringing it in and inclusive of the startup strategies here, I think must be incorporated.
So let's do this. Since we're in Singapore, let's continue on the Singapore thread. And it's going to be a question for Aditya because you're based here in Singapore. As Professor Alberto has said a few times today, so much of life is just getting a little lucky and being in the right place at the right time. And you can't necessarily control that, but what you can control is what you do once you realize you're in the right place at the right time. So this is somewhat personal, but it's a setup to the question. I think it's relevant. I'll try to be brief. Up until 10 years ago, the US and China were getting along. I've been to China more than 50 times back then. I was going all the time with the blessing of the US government. I was moving technology from China to the US, from US to China. I was moving money back and forth, and everyone was happy. It just seemed like it was a golden age. That's not the case now. This is causing problems for South Korea. I have a house in South Korea. My wife's Korean, and my 3 boys were all born there, so it's near and dear to my heart. Korea has a big problem because they're going to have to choose, but the current president feels they don't have to choose. They feel they can thread the needle. Well, Japan has chosen. Japan's like, hey, I'm with the US, and I'm not with China. So Korea's in a real bind. And why? Because they're pretty big, and they're pretty powerful. In a weird way, Singapore, being a relatively small country, can be like Switzerland, a little bit neutral. No one feels threatened by Singapore. Everyone loves Singapore. So you see what I'm leading up to here. I'm not talking about Singapore washing, because that's of great concern to both the Chinese and US government. We don't want people coming here with NVIDIA chips and I'm shaking your hand and next thing you know, it's on a flight to Shanghai. That'll put all of us in jail. But I do think that there are reasonable heads in Beijing and in Washington, D.C., and you may not think that based on what you read in the newspaper, but there are reasonable people in China and in the US who know that the interactions have to continue. And quite frankly, for the good of humanity, and now I sound too emotional, long term, the 2 largest, richest countries in the world have to figure out a way to get along and create value together. But is there a short-term play here, Aditya, where Singapore is a place you can go to start a startup that wants to do some work in China and US, as here we are, but and the US, and India and other big countries, and do it on the up and up? So you see what I'm getting at, so please.
Yeah, so I think there's a bigger geopolitical question here, which I will try and stay under the radar of for the purposes of this panel. But, to really answer your question directly, with a real life example, if you look around this building at any wall, it was painted by a company called Gush. So Gush is a company with NUS alumni that came out, created some really cool materials. And one of the cool things they found is, especially given the climate here, if you paint a patch, a little square patch with Gush paint, there's no mold that forms on it for the next 3 months. You put any other paint, and it was tested, in fact, in this building, and mold just forms everywhere. It's a cool idea of how a technology develops in a place like this. But then we do want, for the sake of clarity, we are investors in Gush paints, or in Gush, the parent company, which has come up with the paints. But we do have a separate US strategy versus a separate China strategy. So within China and a large part of Asia right now, we are manufacturing out of China. For the US, we will not. So we've now found 2 alternate sites for manufacturing. And that's the way we can go about doing business. Otherwise, you get stuck.
So that's a great example. And I really think Singapore may be really lucky at this point in history, because the U.S. is not going to put the pressure on you that the U.S. is putting on South Korea and putting on Japan. And I think in the other direction also, everyone has an interest in seeing Singapore be a nexus for technology. Maybe that's too naive, but that is my hope. Good news is we have an audience question here on the iPad, and this is for Professor Alberto, because it's a question you've gotten many times in your career. As we approach physical limits of downscaling transistors, what comes next for semiconductor chips? Do you think Moore's law is finished? I'm sure you could talk for 6 hours on that.
Well, I heard this since I came to Berkeley in 1975. Already the Moore law was dead, and it's not. But the point is that at some point, we cannot squeeze the atom, right? And so, and we are near the physical limit, so like speed of light. I mean, it's kind of things that you cannot play with, right? Does that mean that is the death of semiconductors? Not at all. In fact, the technology that is being developed now is called also more than more, is the fact of trying to combine semiconductor chips on different substrates. So you get some gain of scaling, but you don't incur into the yield problem. So because another way of growing is that either you make transistors smaller or you make the wafer bigger, right? So the chips bigger, right? And so you can have the cake and eat it too if you make the chip smaller and you make the footprint of what you produce with a substrate bigger, right? And so that in my opinion, there's no question that the future of silicon is that one. How far away? I mean, there are plenty of companies now that are investing. There is also a Singapore companies, by the way, that was born to do that, right? And the founders were actually from Berkeley. The guys are Marvell, right? Unfortunately, Hsieh Tsutarja passed away a few months ago, so his wife is carrying on. But just to say how important is this fact of being intermixed with the world, right? And in Singapore, manufacturing has always been supported, especially in the area of semiconductors. And so I think that there is a future to silicon. I mean, silicon is not going to go away at all.
Great, thank you. And another question from the audience, so thank you. Keep them coming. So this one's for you, Jay. How do you evaluate the quality of ideas, especially at the early stage? The more novel they are, the more challenging this is. What are the top 3 things you use to evaluate ideas?
I think that's a great question. I'm sure everybody here on the panel may have their thoughts. So this year is my 25th year doing early stage venture capital. I entered post-business school, and yes, I am the Stanford MBA guy, but I did have a research background. So I'm basically a double cross X for a professor here, but
You could run a quantum company too.
oh yeah, and drive it to the ground. It'd be very easy for me to do that. But the reason I bring that up, I think what I've learned over time, and it's funny where things come back full circle, because one of the reasons I left my research role as a biochemist is the realization that even if I worked my ass off, excuse my French, I would barely be mediocre, because some of my classmates were brilliant. They just had the level of intelligence that I just did not possess. It's almost like feeling discouraged where, you're in the US, you play football and you just don't have the physical attributes. It's the same with intelligence as well. So my first criteria when I meet a company is raw intelligence. And raw intelligence applied to any problem usually trumps everything else. And the smartest people that I've seen in my career that have been very successful are not only smart enough in their category, but they're also self-aware as well, meaning that they understand what they do well, and they also understand about themselves what they don't do well. And they also are smart enough to be able to convince very compellingly people to work with them that could supplement and complement them. And so the most intelligent guys, number 1. Number 2, self-awareness, that have the ability to build a team. And 3, also have the understanding that it can't be a hobby where you're trying to solve the most exciting and difficult problem to solve. There has to be a utility. There has to be a social utility, basically a value creation by solving that problem. And for me, the entrepreneurs that have the raw intelligence, that have the self-awareness, that also have the commercial mindset or the common sense, quite frankly, to go after a problem to solve are usually the entrepreneurs that I want to work with, that I have seen over the years do very, very well. So that's my criteria. I'm sure there's others around the table.
I think drive and passion is also very important. That comes from the founders themselves. And that's why they need to be involved throughout, even though they team up later with the business people because they don't have a sales background when it's time to sell. They don't have marketing, whatever it is, that drive and passion. I equate being an entrepreneur like being an artist, where you have to do it, otherwise you die. And that's the kind of drive it takes. When Alberto said, never give up, this is the kind of mentality you have to have. And I think you have to feel that from the founders themselves, that they're really going to go somewhere, and that that even though the initial business plan, the technology itself may not be in the market, they'll pivot 3 or 4 times to find a way to find the market for that technology.
I think a really good entrepreneur is a self-aware cult leader who knows something about something, right?
Like a combination of
Okay, so you have to be self-aware, to your point, to know how to complement your team on your journey. You need to be a cult leader because you really got to believe in your mission. You got to convince others that that's true, and you need a pretty damn big following. And this is not just your employees; it's your investors, the market, the customers, right? And you do need to know something about something, to the professor's point, right? A lot of these new technologies are very specific, right? Even AI, we use the word AI, but not all language models are the same. Not all accelerators are the same. So knowing something about something, and I'm just talking about hard tech investing. I'm not about consumer life science. I don't know anything about that. For hard tech investing, you do know. So if you look at the amazing hard tech leaders out there, they're somewhat like that, right? Jensen Huang, right? I didn't include the leather jacket. That's number 4. But you have to hit 4 trillion or 3 trillion before you can wear the leather jacket. But is he self-aware? I think he's really self-aware. If you watch him talk, he's actually quite self-aware. Is he a cult leader? And with that leather jacket, for sure, right? Definitely for sure. And does he know something about something? He absolutely does. So those are hallmarks. If I break it down in that way, it might sound funny, but that's a very reflective characteristics of the really good ones. And by the way, if they have past experience, they're even better. Because I always say in venture, no one knows what to do. But if you know what not to do, you're 50%, 100% ahead of the other person with the same characteristics. Thoughts?
I think you've covered all of it. I mean, there's
Something about NVIDIA. Jensen was a speaker at the Caltech commencement 2 years ago. And he gave a private speech to the management team at Caltech, and he was saying one of the things that talk about luck and talk about kind of taking risks for many years. I mean, a decade or so. They were going after a market, competing with the other semiconductor companies. And at some point, they couldn't really break through and decided to go into, which is completely counterintuitive, into a place where there's no other players, which became AI and all that stuff. Research, yeah, exactly. And that took off. And then, so that decision was super high risk, kind of crazy at the time. So I think one other quality you have to be an entrepreneur is a little bit crazy.
Yeah.
Well, I must say that there is another point which is extremely important, is to be open to recommendation and advice. Because sometimes the failure that I've seen is sometimes the stubbornness of the founders. And so you try to tell them, look, this ain't going to work for the following reason. And say, no, I want to go and carry on. And say, ain't going to work. And the great founder is to the point that you have to know what you know, and you have to know what you don't know, and to listen to advice for what you don't know, right? And one of the issues that you don't have to have necessarily experience, right? It's good to have, but you can get experience in your team, and if you listen, then that experience becomes your experience. So you have to be inclusive. And one of the things that I also notice is charisma. Now, charisma is very difficult to define, but when you find the person who has charisma, the capability of involving people, the willingness to follow, because you have a vision, and because you have a passion, that is extremely important to make the company grow.
All right, so let's shift gears for a second and talk about intellectual property. Normally, the easiest way to bore an audience is to start talking about the intricacies of patent law, but we won't be doing that. And everyone in this room cares about IP and patent law. And Fred, I'm going to set the question up and then ask you, because you are a registered U.S. patent agent. So that means you're a world's expert. So if you've been following this over the last several years, there's been some major changes in patent law in the United States, which at a high level makes patents a little harder to get, more expensive to get. Once you get them, it makes it easier for someone to overturn them. Yes. And thus, ultimately, it leads to patents that may have less value. Now, conversely, there's been changes that have happened to trade secret law by statute yes. and by case, both in the US and also in China and in the EU, where trade secrets are now more valuable than ever, but there's burdens that are put upon you now to make sure they stay secret, not just the standard NDA that people sign. A lot of people are unaware of this point in history where there's a little bit of a trade-off. So now, and Professor Alberto is nodding, and there's no industry that cares more about trade secrets than the semi-world. But to start with Fred and then go to Alberto, what advice are you giving entrepreneurs and professors in terms of what do you patent and what do you keep as a trade secret? Do you worry about these changes in law, or is that just noise? Focus on the invention and just do what's right for that particular invention.
I guess in some ways it's a little bit of noise. What matters most, I mean, you have to prioritize what, in a startup, I think what matters most is the people, then the technology, then the money, and then the IP. That's the order in which I look at them. So that said, if you come out of a university with deep tech, a lab, likelihood people have filed patents. So patents is still the primary way universities protect their IP. They're stronger in life sciences because typically 1 or 2 patents cover a whole compound or molecule. In physical sciences, you have 1,000 patents on the product, so they're not as important. It's somewhat difficult, although it's changing now in universities, to keep trade secrets because we publish a lot of things. So, but we're starting to develop the ability to do that, and in the last 10 years, people have successfully kept information out of the patent system that's not going to be published. That's key to making the technology work. And then, so at the end of the day, in short, is that you look at what you're trying to do as far as a startup and a business. You define your IP strategy. Could be some patents, some trade secret, the combination, and then you go after that. What makes sense for the company? And I think the laws and what's happening are secondary to that drive.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, the point is that it's a balanced strategy. So you have to balance what you protect with, patents, and what you protect with trade secret. I'm a big fan of trade secret since day one. In fact, Cadence and Synopsys, 0 patents, no patent whatsoever. It was all here, right? Because it is a mathematical kind of based stuff, right? And so why do you patent? And plus, everything was in the open domain, so what do you patent? But you cannot patent our brain, right? So that was a key value that the company brought, the know-how, right? So everybody used, there were several companies that were founded after Cadence and Synopsys and were using all our tools from the university. So what was the advantage? Well, it so happens that the inventors were working with Cadence and Synopsys, right? And so the know-how was big. And how do you defend the know-how? Trade secrets. Now, in terms of a patent, why do I say, for example, to a company I work with, patent this and don't patent that? So if you want to, you have to have a patent portfolio just to defend yourself, right? And that is a classic, right? There's nothing new under the sun. But you don't want to patent something that you really care about. And why is that? Because if you patent it, it's public. People read it, right? And so, of course, it's yours, but you find ways. If I'm a competitor, I read that stuff and I say, okay, how do I go around it? This is a good idea. And then I patent another patent, which is more powerful than the patent I publish. It's like when you publish papers, right? So you have some people in University X that publish something and say, I can do that better, and you publish another paper. Same thing for patents, exactly the same. So if there is something that you really think is a key advantage of your company, don't patent it. Keep it under wrap.
The only exception I would say, if you know it's going to come out in the next few years, then you want to patent it. But the famous example is Coca-Cola, right?
Yeah.
It's a trade secret, and nobody knows how to make it. And nobody has exactly copied it because there's no patent out there that shows the recipe.
Exactly right.
In my experience in venture, at least for hard tech engineering centric, not life science or algorithmic type codes, right? In engineering, there's many ways to solve a problem. So if you spend too much time on patenting one way, to the professor's point, you can work around that really easily. In fact, it's even worse. You give them a centricity around which to work it, exactly. Right? And so you typically want to keep it a trade secret. Where patents I found to be useful is typically in the sale of a company. Hey, here's my stack. There's your stack. I argue that I'm worth this, worth that. But that's really it. Very few startups rely on or use patents to get ahead. Typically, it's you keep it secret, you keep your people, and you out execute someone. I think for big companies that like to aggregate portfolios, that's a different game. But as far as startups are concerned, you should use patents quite selectively, use trade secrets in the absolute, and you just have to out execute. Because in engineering, it's a many to one, right? You want to solve one problem, there's 1,000 ways to do it, and you're not going to have a lock on every way. But if you get there first, then who cares what ways you do it? You can start capturing market share and doing a lot of stuff. So this is specific to startups. Okay, Qualcomm would look very differently. And by the way, they're one of the rare cases where you can have an OFDM type patent that really stands forever. But most of the cases, it doesn't. Even NVIDIA doesn't have much real patents to stand on that you would say, oh, that's the only one way to do it to achieve this outcome.
Well, unless you are very clever like what they did at Xilinx, right? They patent the concept of FPGA. So no matter what you did and was programmable, you got to pay Xilinx, right? Or TI, the integrated.
But those are long.
There are two.
Very rare cases. Very rare cases. Very rare.
They would not stand.
They wouldn't stand
in court.
Too general.
No, too general, right?
Yeah. So that was a great discussion, I think relevant to all the entrepreneurs and researchers in the audience. And I'm going to try to go through a couple of quick audience questions. This one, I think, is relevant to what we talked about before in Singapore. So, Aditya, I'll pitch it to you. Turning researchers into entrepreneurs, nature or nurture? Can you really foster entrepreneurship in academia, or do we need to go outside founders to scale? Do we need to find outside founders to scale?
That's a tricky one. And I think it's a great question because I think everyone on this panel is going to have a view on it. We've seen a mix of both. We've seen one or two that have come out and just been able to explain the technology very simply to customers, understood how to speak to or understood what a cap table looked like fairly quickly, and just got on with business. Understood the finance, understood the commerce. Many don't, and I don't think that's a problem, so long as you develop a core team of people that do. And they don't need to be MBAs. They don't need to wear leather jackets, but maybe they do. But sorry, Fred, I'm looking at you for a second with the MBA. But I think, I think it's good to have a core team up there of maybe 2 or 3 people, 2 or 3 co-founders, one of who really can be the cult-like leader and has that vision, may or may not necessarily be the actual researcher. We have seen 1 or 2 cases where that's worked really well. But in many cases, the researcher wanted to become the CTO or the CPO even, and really build the company from there. And you have a Steve Jobs type messiah going out and talking about the company, but you have the Wozniaks in the back of the room actually building the technology and the company. So we think, at least from what we've seen in Singapore, the companies that we've tended to invest in, we are agnostic as to who the actual cult leader is, but there needs to be a good mix of cult leader and technology, and it doesn't matter whether the primary investigator, the primary researcher becomes the CEO or it's someone else.
I read an interesting study not long ago about the average age of founders, and there's this myth that all founders are in their 20s. Now, look, in certain sectors, especially in IT or the latest app or the latest consumer thing, maybe there's a lot of 22-year-olds that found companies. But when you look in the physical sciences, deep tech, hard tech, semiconductors, it's actually quite old for founders. I think Morris was 55 when he founded TSMC. We see lots of founders in their 40s and 50s and beyond. And I say that, I don't want any aspiring entrepreneur saying, oh, I'm too old, I missed my chance. That's absolutely nonsense. And one of the founders of my venture firm, Madrona, he's 93. That's 9-3. He's in the office every day. He talks quick, he listens quick, he walks quick, he's in the meetings. You would have no idea he's 93 years old. Now, is he going to found a company at 93? Probably not, but someone at 63 might. So I just offer that up as hope, and don't worry about age, because we see all shapes and sizes in hard tech. And especially because it's hard tech, you normally need some years in the mountains to actually understand what's going on, even if you're the most brilliant person in the world. So that was sort of a statement, not a question, but if anyone wants to jump on that.
I think there are studies around the average age of founders and CEOs of companies across the board that are in their 40s. That's kind of the sweet spot.
So I think the age doesn't just have to do with wisdom or scar tissue or knowledge, but to have a successful hard tech company, you have to bring an ecosystem along. You have to bring manufacturing, distribution, quality, equipment, materials. And if you haven't been around that long, you probably don't know most of these players, or if you know them, it's very superficial, right? A lot of the best hard tech people that I back who are entrepreneurs, and many of them are multi-time, they know ecosystems very easily. They can call so-and-so at Flex. They can call so-and-so at DuPont and just sort of get stuff done. Whereas if you're just starting out of school, you'd be like, what's DuPont's number? Who at Flex should I call, right? Flex has 22,000 people. Who are you going to call? And so that accumulated knowledge, because we're in the physical world for the most part, right? This isn't just writing an app, distributing it over the internet. If the customer doesn't like it, send them a new code, right? Here you're building inventory. You're managing yield. You're doing all the things in the physical world that actually requires relationships to sort of soothe or lubricate your system. So having that tenure is more about just personal experience. It's also about the network that you're able to tap there and then to accelerate, your go-to-market or product.
But it's also another important thing is the reputation, right? The reputation is key. So you have to have the ecosystem that thinks that you are good, right? That's a reputation. So that's the most precious thing that one can have. So never, ever put your reputation at risk, because once you lose it, it's gone, right? But if you have it, you can do wonders. So for example, again, when we founded Cadence, I was 35, Richard was 32. But we knew all the CEO in the Silicon Valley, all of them, right? Why? Because they like what we were doing. And that's the reason why they pulled us to form the company. And so reputation, right? So is the networking capability that you have because you have a good reputation. When people think that you know how to do something really well, that you are unique in some respect, right? And then that is really valuable, I believe.
I just want to touch upon something that earlier Professor mentioned about not everybody should be an entrepreneur. And I wholeheartedly agree with that, because the path of an entrepreneur is extremely difficult. And everybody has different characteristics and strengths that may be great in terms of research, but maybe not so great as an entrepreneur. Patrick mentioned kind of Korea and being probably the only Korean national in the room. I've been in Silicon Valley for 25 years, and there's a fair growing community of Korean engineers that come out of Stanford or Berkeley that does research. They're engineers at big companies. And many of them have aspirations about starting companies, right? Because that's the hot thing to do in Silicon Valley. And I would say 99% of the time, a lot of them would like to kind of do something, but they're not willing to do what it takes to actually jump in and do it, because it is extremely hard and a lot of sacrifice to do it. And the whole point is it's okay, because everybody has a different way to contribute to society. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, what I was really excited about with all the progress in AI and data science and workflow improvement is folks that really want to just focus on research have so many advantages now, and the tools and the platforms to do great things that will actually change the world, probably more so than a single startup can do, right? And that typical balance between somebody that, is doing some really hardcore research, but because, somebody they know has left to start a company and they kind of feel the FOMO, maybe I should look into that. And when I actually sit down with them, they don't really want to do it. And so the message that I want to convey is that's okay, because not everybody is built to be an entrepreneur. And, there's characteristics that we've mentioned here on the panel that not everybody possesses. But on the other hand, folks that do hardcore research, I respect a lot, because I will never be able to do what they do. And they are the folks that I think are really going to change the world in fundamental ways as well.
Yeah, it's such a great point, because frankly, the average person is not going to be an entrepreneur, let alone a great entrepreneur. But you can bring entrepreneurship into your daily life and into whatever enterprise you work with. So I spend a lot of time with Wipro, which is, I'm on their board. It's a large IT services company based in Bangalore. We've got 240,000 employees. And one of my missions over the last 9 years is to get Wipro to be just a little bit more efficient, because it's spread over such a big base. You have such a great impact if you can make it this much more efficient. Where in my startups, we've got to be 10 times better, or 100 or 1,000 for it to actually make an impact. And I also work with Lockheed Martin, and it's the same thing. I go to their factories and walk the floor, and I say, you know what, if we can do this a little bit better, let's be as entrepreneurial as possible. We're never going to be Steve Jobs, but let's just not be a bureaucrat.
The one last thought, just to finish what I was thinking of trying to finish with, is there will be a moment, even for the folks that are very much engineering and research focused, where they may come up with an idea that they just cannot stop thinking about. They cannot sleep. And when that moment comes, then probably that's a better time to start thinking about starting a company. Even then, there's so many hurdles and barriers to overcome. But the folks that I've seen, the entrepreneurs, they just can't sleep without doing their thing. It's almost like, somebody mentioned a little crazy, 100% a little crazy. Because if you think about the expected value for those capable folks, it's actually entrepreneurship, by definition, a startup. Chances are it's going to fail. So if you are a capable person, it's actually not good expected value to start any company, let alone join a startup. But some people have to do it, even though the math doesn't work.
So we're down to 5 minutes. I want to get a couple more audience questions. Does someone want to jump up to the microphone? Please don't be shy.
Whoever does that will remember them.
Yeah, that's right. When we'll give you preferential terms on your next startup. Is that what you said? No?
Absolutely.
So we do have an audience question here on the iPad, so I'll do that while someone musters up the courage to come ask the question on the microphone. So IP from a single institute is not always sufficient to build a good startup. Do you have any advice for entrepreneurs to collaborate with others? Does someone want to grab that one? Or I'll answer it.
From a single institute?
Yeah.
I recommend against it. Many universities, if you talk about universities and joint IP, it happens all the time. So it depends on who you're working with. Some are very difficult and some are easier. But it's part of your strategy, your go-to-market. Do you need this piece and that piece? Then yeah, you have to bring together. Probably you need to involve the scientists from both as founders so that they're incentivized. And I have to say, beyond two, the agreements between the universities are become very complicated, and it throws obstacle against the welfare of the company. Many times, universities don't look at the long term, and the idea that a little piece of a big pie is better than a huge piece of nothing. And so, I would say, if it's needed for the company, go after these pieces, maybe individually. If you can get in one piece, it's great. Otherwise, try to find other ways around it.
No, it's great advice. I was at a firm called Arch Venture Partners for a long time, and one of the things we did is go to various universities to aggregate IP. And as Fred said, make sure you're doing it for the right reason. Make sure you're doing it because you need that IP, because it supports your business plan. We had a company called Nanosys, which we put together during the first nanotech boom in the late 90s. My grad school colleague, Paul McEwen from Berkeley and from Cornell, was part of that founding. And Samsung was an investor who came in later. And if you watch a Samsung TV, it actually has the technology from Nanosys, so you would think that would be a success. But it was a 25-year journey, and we licensed 400 patents from 14 universities because it was an ego thing. We somehow thought it was a shock and awe. We weren't licensing the patents because we had a path to putting them in any particular product. And in the end, the Samsung patents that went into the product were, a handful of patents. So lesson learned. On one hand, we feel good because when you watch a Samsung TV, I wouldn't be there if it weren't for the work that you did at Samsung and we did together. But boy, what a waste of time it was to do all that other IP collecting. It was like an art museum. All right, we have a question. Please.
Hi, my name is T. I'm a freshman undergraduate, and yes, I feel like I'm a little bit younger than the average audience here, but hopefully, I thought I should shoot my shot, and hopefully my question can be applicable to a lot of people here as well. Do you guys have any, advice on, because I'm also really interested in the entrepreneurship space, or I'll definitely start a company. How do I, as a young aspiring founder, build credibility in such a space that I feel like it's dominated by more seniors, founders, and maybe just any generic advice for a student as well.
Again, I think it's been mentioned before, for any startup, and it doesn't matter when you start the company, you need to have a competitive moat. You need to have deep domain expertise. Now, if you think about it, even at a younger age, there's plenty of folks around social media, social influencers that have far more deep domain expertise than me in my 50s will ever have, right? You need to find that niche where you can actually claim expertise. And that's how you build credibility, I think, for the people that you want to recruit around for your team, as well as potential investors that you want to bring in money from. And with that, then you can create a product and potentially go out for customers. I don't think age necessarily is a barometer for that. Of course, you have an advantage if you're in the industry for 20 years, right? You know people, you know the industry, you know products, you know technology. But if you're that eager to start a company sooner than later, you should be able to find an area that is a relatively new area. Then can't be, by definition, experts that have been in the industry for 20 years, right? So then you can be the forefront expert in that. And for me, that's the only way that you have a higher chance of success, because you need to have deep domain expertise, whatever you do.
And it's all about a founding team. You don't have to do it yourself. So if you have some friends or some classmates or some folks that maybe have more experience in business, you can be part of the founding team. And then you build your credibility, and maybe in the future you spin off and you start your own company. So I wouldn't be discouraged at all when you're early in your career and somehow feel you have to have it all figured out.
Actually, before we end, I had a question. I wanted to double tap on a question that was actually shared there. So I'm a program manager at Block 71, basically an accelerator incubator with NUS Enterprise. And you mentioned a lot of the successful traits of startup. So you mentioned a lot of soft skills, so things like charisma, basically determination, passion. But when we're at the computer there, looking at the decks and looking at the presentations and looking at the traction numbers, revenues, like what are some real world like metrics that we should be looking at to actually qualify them on whether they should be incubated or accelerated with us? I think Dr. Hsieh and also the Prof here mentioned like we don't want to be taking or incubating not that great startups because then the output is not that great as well. Yeah, so if I could just pick your brain on that.
I'll go first. One of the things that I think a lot of younger entrepreneurs tend to think is, oh, if I have an amazing product, they'll come, the market will be there. People beg me for this stuff. But the truth is that unless the market is there, it's very hard for you to influence it to be created just because you did something. So one of the things that when I see this in hard tech, okay, or frontier tech, whatever we're talking about, deep tech, right? I want to make sure that the impact is significant enough. And that if you deliver, a lot of people today, like not 10 years from now, not 15 years from now, today will care. Then if that's true, we can work out the rest. Because if that initial premise is not true, even as a VC with $1 trillion fund, I can subsidize it all day long. But as soon as I remove the subsidy, the demand collapses. That's not very helpful. So, as a deep tech or hard tech entrepreneur, go after something for which, if you can make it happen, the impact is significant. And it's significant as measured by you're going to have people in the market saying, Duke, I really have to have that. Not nice to have, but like must have. And if you just follow that initial boundary condition, I think you can build the rest, the team, the financing, the VCs, the go-to-market around that. But I worry a lot of things people do aren't that significant, right? It's like, oh yeah, it's like number 5 version of this, or like this, the 6th AI accelerator, or, it's the 5th large language model. I mean, so what? And I encourage you to think about that. If you strive for greatness and impact, and it's really there, right? The rest will follow.
Got it. All right, then I won't hold you back any further. So thank you very much, everyone. And we'll see you around